The rain in Charleston never just falls, it weeps. It weeps with a thick, mournful sound, splattering the grand Palladian windows of Davenport Manor, and washing the world in a dreary monochrome that matched the mood settled like mildew in my chest. I stood in the receiving line, a statue carved from grief and $4,000 worth of black silk, nodding vaguely as the city's elite filed past to offer their utterly worthless condolences. Such a tragedy, Sarah, darling. A man of his stature, Mrs. Prescott, whose husband's entire textile fortune was built on my father's quiet political maneuvering, squeezed my hand with the forced sympathy of a viper. I gave her my best Southern belle smile, the one that never reached my eyes and was sharp enough to slice glass. Yes, Mrs. Prescott. A tragedy. It was the word everyone used, a polite, dull shield for the real word that clawed at my throat. Lies. The police had closed the case in 48 hours. Suicide, they'd ruled. A respectable man, overwhelmed by his investments, took his own life with a silver-plated pistol in his private study. They said he left a note. They said he was despondent. They said a great many things, all designed to keep the city's gears greased, and its secrets buried deeper than a low-country tomb. But my father, Senator Elias Davenport, didn't leave notes. He left code. He left whispered instructions tucked into cryptic telegrams and double crosses hidden in plain sight. And he most certainly did not put a bullet in his own temple. The man who taught me how to reload a rifle before I learned to waltz, who told me fear was only a sensation to be studied and dismissed, did not surrender. The problem, as I'd quickly learned upon my unscheduled return from New York, was that everyone wanted this to be suicide. The bankers, the politicians, the mayor sipping sherry 20 feet away. They all needed the tragedy narrative to protect their investments, their reputations, and the fragile, corrupt facade of Charleston society. I felt a sudden, aggressive shift in the atmosphere and glanced up. Standing by the marble fireplace, looking less like a guest and more like a pillar of granite carved from an ancient battlefield, was Captain Elias Eli Thorne, head of the Police Detective Division. A man whose reputation for cleaning up the city's dirtiest messes was only rivaled by the mystery surrounding his own war record. He wasn't smiling. He was watching me. Thorne was a brute in a tailor-made suit, and his presence here felt less like mourning and more like official intimidation. He was here to ensure that I, the sharp-tongued investigative journalist who had been banished north for digging too deep into the state's political finances, didn't disturb the official narrative. I pushed myself away from Mrs. Prescott and walked toward him, ignoring the disapproving glances that followed my decisive strides. "Captain Thorne," I said, my voice dropping to a theatrical hush that cut through the polite murmuring around us. "How thoughtful of you to come." I wasn't aware covering up a crime was part of a detective's social responsibilities. His eyes, the color of cold harbor water, didn't flinch. "Miss Davenport, my condolences. I was a close associate of your father's office. I simply came to pay my respects and confirm you're adjusting well to your sudden loss." The emphasis on sudden loss was deliberate, a reminder that my return was unwelcome. "Oh, I'm adjusting perfectly," I countered, leaning in conspiratorially, the smell of his expensive tobacco and police issue wool assaulting my nose. "I find that burying the dead is far simpler than burying the truth. We journalists, you see, have a tendency to go digging." A flicker, something like annoyance, something like grudging respect, crossed his face. "The case is closed, Miss Davenport. The evidence was irrefutable. You do well to stop digging in the mud and start grieving in the silk, where you belong. And you do well to remember that mud is where the deepest roots are, Captain. And in this family we don't grieve, we investigate." I held his stare for another beat, letting the heat of my unspoken accusation settle between us, then executed a slow, mocking curtsy before sweeping past him. The tension he created was a lifeline. It snapped me out of the paralyzing fog of grief and into the cold, sharp clarity of the hunt. I knew if I stayed in that room, surrounded by false compassion and suffocating lies, I would break. I needed to go to the only place where my father was truly himself, his rose garden. Davenport Manor wasn't just old money, it was Southern Gothic money. Sprawling verandas, dripping moss, and shadows that held the secrets of 3 generations. I slipped down the back stairs, my silk gown snagging on the unpolished wood, trading the smell of sherry and lilies for the damp, earthy scent of the old stone corridor. The rose garden was my father's obsession. Not the showy, vibrant hybrid teas popular among the social set, but the obscure antique roses, the ones with muted colors, dizzying complexity, and lineage that stretched back centuries. They were difficult to cultivate, required patience, and thrived only when their secrets were respected. Just like my father. The rain had momentarily stopped, leaving the petals slick and heavy. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the belle of the ball, a deep red noisette he'd personally imported. I moved past the trellises, my mind running through his strange habits. He had often said, "Sarah, my girl, when a lie is told, the first thing it kills is the evidence. If a man wants to leave a message, he hides it in plain sight. Somewhere people look but never truly see. Where would an experienced paranoid man like Elias Davenport hide the truth from the police, his corrupted associates, and potentially his own family? Not in the safe. Not in the study. In the roses." I knelt beside the largest, oldest rosebush in the garden, a sprawling, almost black hybrid perpetual known simply as the Duchess. This was his favorite, the one he'd tend himself, often for hours after dark. The police had likely scanned the study, checked the desk, and glanced at the garden only for signs of a struggle. They wouldn't have touched the plants. They wouldn't have dared disturb the sacred southern ritual of the garden. I ran my gloved hands over the damp, dark soil at the base of the bush. It was undisturbed, but I remembered something odd from 2 weeks ago when I last spoke to him. He'd mentioned a repotting job that was more complex than planting a sapling. Repotting the Duchess was a task reserved for a team of professionals, yet he'd been insistent on doing it alone. My fingers dug past the loose surface soil, past the small network of fine feeder roots, until they hit something hard and flat, not stone but wood. My heart began to drum a frantic Charleston rhythm against my ribs. I scraped away the earth, tearing the black silk of my gloves, ignoring the stinging scratches from the thorns. Under the wood, nestled deep within the main root structure, was a small lead-lined cylinder wrapped in dark, heavy wax. I recognized the wax immediately. It was the kind he used to seal the bottles of his highly illegal Cuban rum. The rum he smuggled for the very elite currently sipping sherry in my drawing room. The smuggling ring I'd only heard whispered about in New York was real, and my father was involved or he was trying to expose it. With trembling hands, I pried the wax open. Inside, tightly rolled and brittle with age, were several sheets of thin, onion skin paper. Not a suicide note. Not a will. Coded letters. A jumble of numbers and obscure shipping jargon that only someone with my father's unique genius and my training in political cryptology could decipher. I stood up quickly, clutching the lead cylinder to my chest, the cold metal shocking against my racing heart. The rain had started again, a light, insistent drizzle. Victory, sharp and vindictive, coursed through my veins, but it was immediately swallowed by a wave of primal fear. I had the evidence. I had found the whisper beneath the roses. It was then I heard it. A small sound, distinct from the rain and the wind. The crunch of gravel beneath a heavy, deliberate footfall on the main garden path, not 10 yards away. Someone was here. And they weren't here to mourn. My breath caught in my throat. I dropped back down behind the immense rosebush, the thorns of the Duchess raking my expensive silk dress. The adrenaline was a narcotic, sharpening every sense. I could hear the rain hitting the stiff brim of a hat, the labored sound of breathing, heavy, steady, professional. It was too close to be a servant. It was too silent to be a guest. My eyes strained through the dripping leaves. The figure was large, a towering shadow rendered indistinct by the gloom. They stopped, and I could feel the invisible weight of their gaze sweeping the garden, pausing exactly where I had been standing moments before. My mind raced. If they saw the fresh dirt, if they saw the damage to the bush, I was finished. I had to disappear. I started to crawl backward, silent as a water moccasin, trying to use the rosebeds as cover. Crunch. The footstep followed. Closer. Now they were off the gravel path, sinking slightly into the wet soil. They knew I was here. Or they knew something was here. I froze, squeezing my eyes shut, wishing I could disappear into the earth like the letters I held. I focused on the footsteps. They were too measured, too confident to be a panicked search. This was a sweep. Then the shadow stopped right at the edge of the rosebed. I could smell the leather of their shoes, the wet wool of their coat, and then a scent that drove the air from my lungs. A familiar, sharp, spicy scent, like imported cloves and expensive forbidden whiskey. I slowly lifted my head, just enough to see past the curtain of dark petals. A hand, large, scarred, and completely bare, reached down and casually plucked a single perfectly formed, deep red petal from the bell of the ball bush beside me. The figure tilted their head, their face still obscured by the shadow of their wide-brimmed hat, but the way they held their body, the coiled tension, the casual, deadly grace, was unmistakable. This was a man trained to kill. A man who moved in the dark as if he owned it. Then he spoke. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, roughened at the edges like expensive sandpaper. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. A voice that had once promised me forever. You always did prefer the night air, Sarah. Get up. You've disturbed the crime scene. He stepped out of the shadow. The rain caught the gold on the lapel of his trench coat, revealing the polished brass of a detective's shield. But my gaze fixed not on the badge, but on the intensity in his eyes the color of dark amber and filled with a pain that matched my own. It was Detective Nathan Cole, the brooding war veteran, the man I knew carried a secret connection to my family, the man I had loved and the last person on earth who should be investigating my father's death. And as he stood over me, his face was not the mask of an official, but a reflection of guilt. My father's letter crackled in my hand. He knew I would come here. He knew I would find the truth. But he never told me the man they sent to bury it would be him. Nathan, I whispered, the name a betrayal on my own tongue. What have you done? His expression hardened, and he took a step closer, his shadow falling over me like a pall. His eyes dropped to the cylinder clutched in my hand. I'm here to save your life. Give me the evidence, Sarah. Now. Chapter 1. I am not saving my life, Nathan, I'm starting it. And you are standing in the way of a great deal of investigative journalism. I didn't get up. I remained crouched in the mud, clinging to the evidence like it was the last piece of my father I had left. The rain plastered my hair to my temples. My throat still burned from the shock of seeing him, but the fear was now a cold, concentrated rage. The kind of rage that made me deadly efficient. Nathan Cole was a masterpiece of masculine despair. Even dripping wet, with the scent of cloves and wet earth mixing on him, he looked like a god who'd been cast out of heaven and decided to make do in the trenches. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't need to. His sheer presence was a weapon. A blend of brooding intensity and the terrifying stillness of a man who'd seen too many horrors in the Great War. This isn't a story, Sarah. This is a nest of vipers, he said, his voice dropping to a low, desperate plea that was more effective than any command. Your father was playing a game far above your head. You find this cylinder, and suddenly the official suicide gets very complicated. They sent me to make sure it stayed simple. They sent you to bury the truth, I countered, finding the raw anger fueling my voice. And I won't let you. Not you of all people. That hit him. The muscles in his jaw tightened. A perfect knot of pain and conflicted duty. Nathan was bound by his badge, but he was also bound by history. 5 years ago, before the whisper started and the war took its last silent toll on his soul, we had almost been each other's future. He knew my father. He knew our family's secrets. That was the real reason Captain Thorne had assigned him the suicide cleanup. Not for his competence, but for his compromise. He took a slow, deliberate step onto the path, and I finally made my move. I didn't run away, I darted toward him. With a speed born of pure instinct, I lunged past his right side, dragging my sharp, broken thumbnail across the back of his exposed hand, right near the fresh scar that tracked across his knuckles. It wasn't a crippling injury, but it was enough to momentarily break his concentration. "You'll have to be faster than that, detective," I hissed, already scrambling toward the veranda. "Damn it, Sarah." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I was out of the garden and into the oppressive darkness of the manor. I didn't go to my room. I went to the old, disused linen closet in the north wing. Behind a stack of moth-eaten damask, a loose panel led to a forgotten servant's staircase. 10 minutes later I was out the back gate, my expensive silk dress ruined, the lead cylinder tucked securely beneath my coat, and the rhythmic beat of the rain replaced by the rhythmic beat of my defiance. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was chasing a ghost and fighting a man I should never have trusted. My sanctuary was a tiny mold-damp flat above a Chinese laundry just off Meeting Street. It was anonymous, affordable, and smelled permanently of starched cotton and jasmine tea. Perfect for a girl trying to disappear into the teeming chaos of 1930s Charleston. I stripped off the ruined black gown and pulled on a dark, practical suit, trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a man's velvet waistcoat. I was no longer the senator's grieving daughter. I was Sarah Davenport, the journalist, ready to move through the shadows. I laid the onion skin letters out under the harsh glare of a single desk lamp. The code was devilish, a sequence of numbers interwoven with Latin phrases and Greek symbols, but the familiar structure soothed the frantic chaos in my heart. This wasn't panic. This was the calm, cool logic that had always connected me to my father. "Where is the key, Papa? You always leave a key." I rubbed the lead cylinder, remembering his lesson. "The most secure lock is the one you carry with you, Sarah." The key wasn't a separate piece of paper. It was in the antique roses, specifically the arcane Latin botanical names of the roses he cultivated. I had seen them scrawled in his gardening journals 1,000 times. I grabbed his last journal. On the last page, under the entry for the Duchess, was a cryptic note. "Shift 15, then consult the bell." Shift 15. A Caesar cipher. A straightforward shift of 15 letters. That decoded the numbers. Consult the bell. The bell of the Ball Rose was a noisette, one of the first in his collection. Its botanical name, when translated to a numbering system, A=1, B=2, became the Vigenère cipher key. Within an hour, fueled by bad coffee and sheer adrenaline, the truth bled out onto the desk. The code was a logistics report. It wasn't a political dossier. It was a meticulous, detailed log of illegal shipments. Rum, jewelry, and unregistered bearer bonds, all smuggled through the port of Charleston. But the final note, scrawled in my father's familiar, elegant hand, was the indictment. "Tonight, midnight, the Serpent's Coil. The finance team is meeting. It's all going through the Serpent's brother. Expose the source of the financing, and the entire city will crumble." The Serpent's Coil. It was a notorious high-end speakeasy buried deep in the labyrinthine tunnels near the harbor. A place where the city's elite mixed with the deadly underworld. It was the pulsing, corrupt heart of the city's hidden economy, and tonight it was hosting the men who had orchestrated my father's murder. And the Serpent's brother. That sounded less like a place and more like a person. A person with immense power, perhaps even someone within the established authority that was currently watching me. I thought of Captain Thorne and then immediately of Nathan Cole. The dark, familiar name sent a cold wave of dread through me. A secret connection to her family. Could it be Nathan's own sibling? The thought was a sickening drop into despair. I snatched up my coat. I had the when and the where. Now I needed the who. The streets were slick with fresh rain, reflecting the neon signs of the legal businesses and the muted lamps of the illicit ones. As I strode down a shadowed alley toward the waterfront, the pungent smell of salt, brine, and smuggled goods filled the air. I was 3 blocks from the Coil when a sleek black sedan, a 1936 Packard, glided out from the deeper shadows of a warehouse and cut off my path. The driver's side window purred down. "A change of wardrobe, Miss Davenport. Appropriate. You look like you mean business," Nathan said, leaning over the passenger seat. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a heavy, dark trench coat and a fedora that hid the scars of his past. He looked less like a detective and more like a beautifully dangerous hitman. My blood pressure spiked. "You followed me. You think I'd leave the key to the senator's investigation loose in this city? I know your routes, Sarah. I know your secrets. And I know you just cracked that code. He reached across the seat and tossed a cigarette case onto the pavement near my feet. The case was silver, inlaid with my father's initials. It wasn't my father's. It was the one Nathan used to carry. I knew he was trying to distract me, trying to remind me of what we were, or what we used to be. I ignored the bait. You're off the clock, detective. Go back to Captain Thorne and file your false report. The finance team is meeting tonight at the Coil, he stated, his amber eyes intense. Don't pretend you didn't read it. I've known about the Serpent's Coil for months. It's too dangerous for you. If you walk in there alone, you'll be buried deeper than your father's roses. Then you stop me, I challenged, pulling myself to my full height. Arrest me. Confiscate the evidence. Do your job, Nathan. Don't just sit there protecting me out of some misplaced sense of Southern chivalry. A slow, painful smile touched his lips, a flash of white in the gloom. I'm not trying to protect you, Sarah. I'm protecting the evidence. If you're determined to go in, I'm your shield. They'll see the badge and back off. They'll see the man who closed the case, and they won't suspect you're digging up their dirt. He was right. I hated it, but he was right. My father's notes implicated the highest levels of Charleston society. Nathan's badge wasn't a weapon against me. Tonight it was the perfect camouflage. I opened the passenger door. Fine. You drive, detective. But you take your orders from me. I'm the journalist, you're the muscle. Deal, he murmured, easing the powerful Packard forward. But if I have to choose between your life and a scoop, I'm taking your life. The Serpent's Coil was a breathtaking descent into sin and opulence. We left the Packard in a shadowed courtyard and descended a flight of crumbling stone steps, entering a hidden cavern beneath an old colonial warehouse. The air inside was thick, luxurious, and heavy with the scent of gin, expensive perfume, and hot, frantic sweat. A small band on a raised velvet stage was tearing through a brassy, wicked version of Black Bottom Stomp. The crowd was a magnificent mix. Debutantes in glittering flapper dresses, politicians with telltale rings of sweat beneath their collars, and hard-eyed men in ill-fitting suits who looked like they knew how to break bones. Nathan, with his quiet intensity and trench coat, was instantly noticeable but also respected. He nodded once to the bouncer, a hulking brute with a chipped tooth, and the man immediately moved aside. Look for the finance team, I whispered, my eyes scanning the room. My father described them as the three snakes. They'll be too arrogant to hide. We slipped into the shadows near the bar, ordering 2 illicit scotches. The intimacy of being pressed close to him, the warm electric danger of the city's heart beating around us, was intoxicating. There, Nathan muttered, nodding toward a velvet-draped booth tucked into the darkest corner of the room. 3 of them. They haven't ordered drinks, and they haven't taken off their coats. They're waiting for someone. One man, corpulent, wearing a diamond stick pin and a smile too wide for his face, checked his pocket watch every 30 seconds. I leaned closer to Nathan, my voice barely audible over the trumpet's wail. That's our man. The watch checker. He's the contact. The one who receives the final log. We began to circle the room, navigating the drunken dancers and the whispered deals. My plan was simple. Use the crowd for cover, get close enough to hear who the contact was waiting for, and find out how they connected to the Serpent's brother. Just as we reached the booth, the corpulent man looked up, his face slick with sweat and impatience. A figure was moving through the crowd toward him, a thin, nervous man carrying a leather attaché case. He was clearly the runner, the final piece of the shipment puzzle. There's the log, Nathan whispered, his hand resting instinctively on the small of my back, a gesture that sent a jolt of fire through my silk shirt. Wait for them to exchange the case. The runner reached the booth. He slid the attaché case across the table. The corpulent man snatched it up, his face breaking into a triumphant, greedy smile. Excellent. Did the brother confirm the new delivery route? The corpulent man asked, his voice low but cutting through the jazz. The runner nodded nervously. Yes, sir. Everything is confirmed. The senator's unfortunate accident cleared the way. I stepped forward, ready to intervene, ready to make my move. Nathan's hand tightened, pulling me back slightly. Not yet, Sarah. Let him talk. But the conversation ended abruptly. The runner didn't reply to the corpulent man. He simply stared, his eyes widening in a silent, horrific realization. Then he crumpled. His body hit the table with a dull thud, overturning the bottle of gin. He hadn't been shot, there was no sound of a struggle, and no one near him had moved. But the greedy smile on the corpulent man's face vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. Poison, Nathan breathed, pulling me immediately behind the cover of a thick, velvet curtain. Fast. They knew he was a risk. But the dead man, the runner, had one final message. His fingers scrabbled weakly at the table, knocking over the diamond stickpin of the man who'd killed him. His eyes, fixed and staring, locked onto Nathan. His lips moved in a final, agonizing effort. The only word that escaped before his gaze went vacant, before the music swelled again and the crowd failed to notice the silent murder, was a single damning sound, a sibilant whisper that tore the air between us. Cole. My blood ran cold. The word hung in the smoky air, confirming my darkest fear. The murder was not just part of the smuggling ring. The poison was meant to protect a specific family name. I turned slowly to Nathan, whose face was a mask of shock and something far more terrible, recognition. He didn't say Cole, Sarah. He didn't say cold, Nathan rasped, his eyes burning with frantic denial. He meant my brother, Arthur Cole. Chapter 2. The word felt like a death sentence whispered in a cathedral. Not for the runner now slumped over the gin-soaked velvet, but for Nathan. And perhaps for me. Arthur. I repeated, the name tasting like ash. I knew Arthur Cole. Everyone in Charleston's old money circles knew Arthur. He was the golden boy, a successful lawyer, a respected wartime advisor, and the very embodiment of the clean, respectable society Nathan fought to protect. He was the perfect, glittering facade for the rot my father had been investigating. Nathan reacted with the explosive force of a coiled spring. His hand clamped down on my arm, not cruelly, but with the desperate strength of a drowning man. We're gone. Now. The two men at the table, the finance snakes, they know he named a Cole. They don't know which Cole, but they'll be watching the doors. We move. The brassy jazz provided our cover. The murder had been silent, swift, and designed to look like a man simply passed out drunk. As Nathan pulled me through the throngs of dancers, I forced my mind away from the sickening implication and back to the mission. He said, the brother, Nathan. Your brother is the serpent's brother? I hissed against his ear. He's certainly close to the high society smugglers, Nathan conceded, his voice dangerously low as he guided me expertly around a drunken politician. Arthur handles the legal logistics for half the elite families in this city. He's connected to every bond and every illicit shipment. But he's not a killer. He's a lawyer, Sarah. Not a thug. Maybe he hires the thugs, I shot back. The idea that Arthur, who had once danced with me at the governor's ball and spoken eloquently on civic duty, was funding a criminal enterprise felt almost worse than the suicide lie. We burst out of the smoky heat of the coil and into the cool, damp alley. Nathan shoved me into the passenger seat of the Packard. Before he even started the engine, he looked at me, his face etched with a warring mixture of loyalty and suspicion. Listen to me. If Arthur is involved, he's involved at the top. This isn't just rum. Your father's note mentioned bearer bonds. That's serious money, high-stakes political financing. If they think the code cylinder is still loose, they won't just send police. They'll send professionals. Then we use the code cylinder, I argued, pulling the lead case from my coat and placing it on the dashboard. This is the only leverage we have. If Arthur is the link, we follow the money right back to him. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his damp, dark hair, a rare flash of fatigue in the iron control he usually maintained. Fine. But we don't go to the police. We don't go to Thorne. Thorne is either compromised or too blinded by politics to see the truth. We go to your father's office. We drove across town in tense silence. The Packard slid through the historic streets, past the tall wrought iron gates of old estates, each one looking like a gilded cage holding 1,000 dark secrets. I noticed Nathan constantly checking his rearview mirror, his war-trained eyes seeking the telltale flicker of surveillance. He wasn't just afraid for the case. He was afraid for his brother. Senator Davenport's private office was not at the State House. It was a discreet, single-story property near the Battery, disguised as a historical preservation society. The keys were hidden inside a ceramic bird feeder, a detail only Nathan and I would know, a secret we'd shared during a reckless midnight picnic 5 years ago. Inside, the office was a museum of old-world efficiency. Leather, mahogany, and the faint, permanent smell of ink and polished brass. We need to find the recipient list, I said, heading straight for the massive, double-locked vault built into the rear wall. If my father was tracking the money, he kept a list of who was buying the smuggled bonds. That list is the city's death warrant. The vault is a distraction, Nathan countered, already pulling out the senator's antique globe. My father would hide his most damning information in the open, something the police would classify as mundane office clutter. He spun the globe slowly, his gloved fingers searching the curvature of the continents. He stopped at the Mediterranean and pressed firmly on a small, insignificant island. A tiny, almost invisible seam opened near the axis. Hidden inside was a roll of microfilm. A gentleman always knows where to hide his little secrets, Nathan murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He was showing off his brilliance, the mind that mirrored my father's, the brilliance that had drawn me to him years ago. I ignored the personal connection and snatched the film. Let's hope this is more revealing than his rose codes. We developed the film in the small, antiquated darkroom attached to the office. The tension of waiting, bathed in the red glow of the safety lamp, was suffocating. I felt Nathan standing behind me, his proximity a distraction I fiercely resented. The film revealed 3 things. A ledger of wire transfers dated over the last 5 years, all routed through an offshore account in the Bahamas. The amounts were staggering. A photographic roster of the finance team we'd seen at the Coil, confirming the corpulent man was the operations bookkeeper, Elias Thorne's former administrative assistant. The final damning piece. A copy of an indictment my father had prepared, listing the names of those who benefited from the smuggling. I seized the last image and held it up to the light. The list was a who's who of Charleston, the mayor, the police commissioner, the head of the Port Authority. And right at the top, the primary beneficiary, was the man controlling the money. Arthur C. Cole, the Serpent's brother. "It's here, Nathan," I whispered, the paper shaking in my hands. "Your brother isn't just connected. He's the hub. He's the one who funneled the bond money, the one who financed the whole operation." Nathan snatched the photo from me. He stared at his brother's name, his face draining of color. The quiet denial he'd held onto in the car shattered. "It's a frame-up," he insisted, his voice rough. "Arthur handles the mayor's finances. They forced him to sign documents. He didn't know the source. My father didn't write indictments based on forced signatures," I said firmly, leveling my gaze at him. "He was meticulous. This is the truth, Nathan. Your brother had the motive to silence the senator and the means to cover it up. The argument was a low-stakes fight over a personal betrayal, but the truth was a public enemy. Just as the silence between us stretched to an agonizing breaking point, a sound outside the office jolted us both to attention. Not footsteps, but the telltale click of the ceramic bird feeder being moved. "Someone has the spare key," Nathan breathed, instantly dropping into the controlled, predatory readiness of a hunter. He drew his service revolver, a heavy, cold piece of steel. "Thorne," I guessed, my mind racing. "He knew your father trusted you, and he knew we'd meet here." "Worse than Thorne," Nathan said, his eyes fixed on the door, which was slowly, silently opening. "Thorne is meticulous. This is crude. This is someone sent to clean up the mess without paperwork." The door swung inward. Standing silhouetted against the streetlights wasn't a uniformed officer, but a heavy-set man in a rumpled suit. He held a length of wire coiled loosely in his hand. His face was unremarkable, but his eyes were flat, professional, and devoid of remorse. The realization hit me. This man was the cleanup crew for the Serpent's brother. He was the one who had poisoned the runner and now came for the senator's documents. "Detective Cole," the man drawled, his voice bored. "The captain sent me. Seems you missed a few pieces of evidence." He wasn't from the police. He was lying. He was using Thorne's authority as a cover. Nathan knew it too. "I'm afraid the senator's archives are classified," he said, his voice level, his gun steady. "You'll need proper authorization." "Authorization is here." The man nodded toward the desk where the indictment lay exposed under the red light. "And the senator's daughter here is disrupting an official investigation. A shame if she had an accident." The man moved astonishingly fast, his wire snapping out with deadly speed. Nathan didn't hesitate. He shoved me violently behind a large filing cabinet, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. Blam! Nathan's service revolver cracked, the sound deafening in the small office. The bullet hit the wall next to the hired killer, showering the room in plaster dust. But the killer hadn't stopped. He spun, his wire aimed not at Nathan, but at the exposed microfilm on the counter. He wasn't here for murder yet. He was here for the evidence. The killer grabbed the film and turned to flee. Nathan raised his gun again, his jaw set. "Wait!" I shouted, lunging from behind the cabinet. "Let him go. We have the hard copy." Nathan hesitated, a fraction of a second, the lifetime of a betrayal, before the man disappeared through the open door. Nathan lowered his gun, his chest heaving. He looked furious, but he had spared the man's life. "We let him take the copy of the film," Nathan said, running a hand over his face. "He'll report back, thinking he has the original. That buys us time." "It buys us time, yes," I conceded, still catching my breath. "But it also tells Arthur exactly who is working against him." I held up the paper copy of the indictment, the list of names, the proof of corruption. Below Arthur Cole's name, scrawled in my father's almost illegible margin notes, was a single cryptic instruction. "The vault door is sound. The key is in the past. Look where the heart was broken." I looked at Nathan, the damning truth of his brother's guilt now between us, sharp and undeniable. His gaze, however, was focused entirely on my father's cryptic message. "The key is in the past," I repeated. "But whose past? Yours, Nathan? Or my father's?" Chapter 3. The smoke from Nathan's discharged revolver still curled in the red darkroom light, smelling of burnt oil and fear. The killer was gone, and with him the easily digestible copy of my father's microfilm. But we were left with the cold, hard truth. Arthur Cole was the Serpent's brother, and the city's corruption was rooted in the man Nathan called family. I ignored the way my legs were shaking and focused on the paper in my hands, tracing the senator's elegant script beneath Arthur's name. "The vault door is sound. The key is in the past. Look where the heart was broken." "Whose heart, Nathan?" I demanded, turning to face him. He was reloading his revolver with the mechanical efficiency of a veteran, but his hands betrayed him, trembling faintly. "Was it my father's heart, broken by his corrupted friends? Or your heart, broken 5 years ago when you walked away from me?" He snapped the cylinder back into the revolver, the metallic click slicing through the tension. "Don't be sentimental, Sarah. My father taught me to never mix business with melodrama. Elias Davenport was a political shark. His heart was broken by betrayal, not by some ill-fated romance. Maybe, but he was also a man who knew how to use sentiment as a cipher," I countered, stepping closer, forcing him to meet my gaze. "He knew the police would tear this office apart looking for ledgers, wills, and suicide notes. He knew you would be the one assigned to close it. He used a clue only the two of us would understand. The key is the place where we were broken." Nathan's amber eyes hardened, a wall going up between us, shutting off the pain I knew was simmering beneath the surface. You think a multi-million-dollar smuggling ring comes down to a tearful goodbye at a party? I think the best hiding place is the one you're too afraid to revisit. The Charleston Yacht Club. 5 years ago, Nathan, on the night of the Commodore's ball. The night you told me you were leaving the city for good, and never told me why. That was the night our world ended. We had argued in the club's secluded gazebo overlooking the harbor, the humid air thick with the scent of jasmine and betrayal. I accused him of cowardice. He accused me of naivety. He walked away from me and into the war-torn silence of the North. My father had orchestrated my banishment a week later. It was the only time I ever saw the senator truly angry, and the only time he refused to tell me why. Nathan looked away, his jaw tight. If you're wrong, we've wasted precious hours. The man who escaped will report back, and Arthur will know his cover is blown. And if I'm right, we get into that vault and we get the evidence that buries your brother. We find out why you left, why my father was silenced, and why this entire city smells of rot beneath the perfume. I saw the internal conflict raging behind his eyes, the unwavering loyalty to his brother, the visceral pull of justice ingrained by his badge, and the agonizing tether of our past. Justice won narrowly. Fine, he rasped, snatching his coat. The club is currently hosting the annual Mariners Convention. It will be crowded and impossible to move through. We'll need a cover story. Leave that to the journalist, I said, already shedding my coat and straightening my crisp white shirt. In this city, if you want to disappear, you wear a gown and make a scene. I'll go in as a social reporter for the Post. You go in as my long-suffering cameraman. Look bored, look handsome, and try not to shoot anyone who spills their gin on my dress. 30 minutes later, the Packard glided up to the imposing marble facade of the yacht club. It was a riot of 1930s excess. Polished brass, gleaming white columns, and a stream of beautiful drunken people spilling out onto the steps. I was wearing a dress I'd found tucked into a forgotten trunk in the office. An emerald silk sheath that clung to every curve and moved with a scandalous grace. It was the color of forbidden desire, and it was guaranteed to draw attention and distract anyone sent to intercept us. You look magnificent, Nathan muttered, his voice flat as he held the car door open. He looked anything but bored. He looked like he wanted to wrap me in his trench coat and hide me from the world. And you look like you're contemplating homicide, I replied, allowing him to take my arm. Relax, detective. Look charming. You're on my payroll now. We made our way through the glittering crowd. Every eye in the lobby tracked us. A quick flash of the press badge I'd fabricated, a brittle smile, and we were inside the main ballroom. The air was thick with smoke, cheap champagne, and the loud, frantic energy of a city trying to forget the depression. The ballroom was our hunting ground, but our target was the secluded gazebo on the south veranda, the exact spot where our history had ended. The key isn't hidden under a bush or behind a statue, I whispered, navigating a path between a powerful banker and his wife. It's hidden in a familiar gesture. A gesture. Nathan raised a skeptical eyebrow, his gaze sweeping the room for threats. On that night, you weren't just leaving me. You were telling me that my father was wrong about something monumental. You made me promise that if I ever needed the truth, I would remember the last thing you touched before you walked away. We reached the veranda, stepping out of the noisy ballroom and into the relative quiet of the moonlight. The gazebo stood like a lonely sentinel at the edge of the property, its white-painted lattice illuminated by a single weak lamp. As we walked toward it, Nathan finally broke his silence. I left that night because your father, the senator, showed me proof that my own father, a decorated war hero, was guilty of accepting massive bribes to swing the Port Authority contracts. Elias threatened to expose him. He forced me out of the city and off the force to protect his own political interests. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, yet it explained everything. Nathan's guilt, his quiet rage, his strange conflict with my father, and the reason I was banished. My father had protected his political standing by sacrificing Nathan's family and our future. He broke your heart then, I breathed, the full weight of the clue finally settling in. And he used the location of the break to save his life. We reached the gazebo. It was empty. The paint was peeling, and the floorboards creaked beneath our weight. I remembered the last thing Nathan had touched before he walked away from me. The bronze plaque affixed to the central pedestal, bearing the club's motto, Fides est fortissimus. Faith is strongest. I knelt, ignoring the dust and the ruined silk. I traced the worn letters, just as he had traced them that night, his thumb moving almost unconsciously over the capital F in Fides. F, I whispered. That's the clue. Nathan knelt beside me, his arm brushing mine, the intimacy of the shared search electric. He pressed on the letter F. Nothing happened. It's not the letter, he said, his breath warm on my neck as he leaned in. It's the number. He pulled out a small specialized penknife, the kind designed for intricate bomb disposal, not office work. He inserted the blade into the tiny seam of the letter F and gently pried. The entire bronze plaque swung outward on a subtle hinge, revealing a small velvet-lined niche. Inside lay a single antique brass key tarnished with age. It was long, slender, and intricate, the kind of key designed to unlock a very serious, very old safe. The vault key, Nathan said, his voice flat with grim satisfaction. He used the moment of betrayal to hide his greatest secret. Elias Davenport never trusted anyone. Except me, I countered, taking the key and sliding it into the deep, hidden pocket in my dress. He trusted me to remember what you tried to hide. We stood up, the tension now not between us, but aimed squarely at the man who had pulled all our strings, Arthur Cole. He knows we have this key by now, Nathan stated, looking back toward the brightly lit club entrance. He let us get it. Arthur is meticulous. He doesn't play defense, he plays chess. As if on cue, a sudden blinding flash erupted from the balcony of the club's main terrace, followed by the dull muted thud of an antique press camera. He's not just watching, he's documenting, I said, instinctively shrinking into Nathan's shadow. Someone just took a photo of the disgraced detective and the senator's daughter illegally breaking into the club and retrieving a key. It's a frame-up, Nathan confirmed. The photo will be in the Post tomorrow. Detective Cole caught stealing. We just gave the serpent's brother the ammunition to discredit us before we even opened that vault. Then we beat him to press time, I said, adrenaline flooding my veins. We go back to the office, open that vault, and use whatever is inside to destroy Arthur before the morning papers hit the streets. We race back to the Packard, the brass key burning a hole in my pocket. The drive back was a blur of high-speed turns and silence. Back in the dark, tense quiet of the senator's office, the massive steel vault door loomed, a silent, implacable sentinel. Nathan inserted the key. The tumblers fell with a deep, grinding finality. He pulled the door open. Inside, the vault wasn't filled with ledgers or stacks of cash. It was small, dusty, and almost entirely empty, save for 3 items placed on a central velvet pedestal. A tarnished silver locket. It was engraved with the name Elizabeth, Nathan's mother. A formal portrait photo. It was a young, impossibly handsome Senator Elias Davenport, smiling warmly, with his arm around a stunningly beautiful woman with Nathan's exact amber eyes, Elizabeth Cole. A single crisp manila envelope. It was sealed with my father's familiar Cuban rum wax seal, and simply addressed in his hand, to my daughter Sarah. My breath hitched. The pieces slammed together with horrifying clarity. The broken heart wasn't just Nathan's betrayal. It was my father's affair with Nathan's mother. A secret that spanned decades and defined our entire lives. My mother had died young, broken by her husband's infidelities. Nathan's family had been torn apart by my father's political moves. Nathan stood beside me, his gaze locked on the photo of his mother and my father, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. The photo was a punch to his gut, a confirmation that his own past was the foundation of the corruption we were investigating. I slowly reached for the manila envelope, my hand shaking too badly to be steady. I tore the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a confession. It was a cryptic, last-ditch instruction. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, I am dead. Arthur has the ultimate weapon. The Black Ledger, hidden in the one place no one would dare look. It exposes everyone, from the mayor to the governor. And yes, my child, it confirms my complicity, your mother's pain, and the true cost of my power. You must find it. I paid a heavy price to keep it hidden. The ledger is buried beneath the serpent's brother's pride. You have less than 24 hours. Elias. I looked up at Nathan, whose face was a mask of cold white shock, not from the corruption, but from the portrait of his mother. He hid the final truth in here, Nathan, I whispered, holding the note. But Arthur has the ledger. And this whole mess? It's not just about a smuggling ring. It's about a decades-old love affair between my father and your mother. We're not just solving a murder. We're exposing our parents' betrayal. Nathan finally moved. He didn't look at the letter or the locket. His hand slammed down on the vault door, and he pushed it shut with a violent clang that echoed through the quiet office. Arthur has the ledger, he repeated, his voice dangerously low, his eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and renewed, terrifying focus. And I know exactly where his pride is buried. The ledger is in his house. And tonight we're breaking in. Chapter 4. The photo of my father and Elizabeth Cole was the ultimate red herring. A decades-old, devastating distraction placed there by a master manipulator. My father hadn't just been murdered. He had been perfectly framed by a man who understood the power of emotional leverage. Arthur Cole. The vault door clanged shut, silencing the ghosts. The portrait of Nathan's mother, Elizabeth, with my father was still seared behind my eyelids, but the shock was now channeled into a cold, lethal resolve. He didn't just frame my father for smuggling, I stated, gathering the scattered remnants of the microfilm and the indictment list. Arthur knew this photo would break you. He knew it would cloud your judgment, waste our time, and make you doubt your family, your mother's memory, and even your purpose. Nathan stood motionless, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. His war-trained mind was fighting a brutal internal battle between the man who demanded justice and the son who demanded denial. My mother was a good woman, Sarah, he said, his voice stripped bare of its usual resonant depth. She wasn't an adulteress. The dead don't tell tales, Nathan. But the living leave records, I countered softly, pulling the investigation back into the light. My father's note confirms Arthur has the Black Ledger, the master list that will expose the entire operation and the final proof that my father was killed to stop him. We have less than 24 hours before Arthur either destroys it or uses the photo to ruin us. We don't have time for history. We have to find the ledger. Nathan finally turned, his eyes burning with a controlled, terrifying intensity. The grief was still there, but it was now weaponized. You're right. He played me, Nathan confirmed, pulling his trench coat tighter around his frame. But my father also taught us to use people's vanity against them. The ledger is buried beneath the serpent's brother's pride. Arthur's pride isn't money or status. It's his family's honor, his immaculate reputation, and his house, the beautiful, untouchable symbol of the Cole name. Arthur Cole lived in a stately Georgian mansion on the Battery, a monument to old Southern wealth and impeccable taste. It was a fortress of propriety, the last place anyone would dare look for a hidden document. It's a suicide mission, I whispered, gathering my hair into a tight, practical knot at the base of my neck. It's the only mission, Nathan corrected, holstering his revolver. Arthur is out tonight. He'll be consolidating his power, ensuring the mayor and commissioner are prepared for the backlash from his assassin's report. We hit his house now before dawn. We get the ledger, we leak it to the press, and we collapse his house of cards. The journey to the Cole mansion was a silent dance of evasion. Nathan was a ghost driver, moving the Packard through Charleston's hidden alleyways and shadowed side streets, constantly checking for the heavy tale we knew Arthur must have placed on his brother. The rain had intensified, washing the city in a clean sheen that only highlighted its inherent filth. We parked 2 blocks from the Battery, near the old seawall. The Cole mansion stood sentinel against the crashing Atlantic waves, its windows dark and uninviting. Arthur doesn't trust vaults or safes, Nathan murmured, his voice low and tactical as we scaled the garden wall. He trusts complexity. He would hide the ledger somewhere that requires deep knowledge of the house's structure, somewhere only he, and maybe a member of his immediate family, would know. We slipped around the back of the house, moving with the practiced silence of a pair who had once spent their youth breaking rules together. Nathan forced the lock on the back pantry door with an almost brutal efficiency. Inside, the house was immaculate, suffocatingly silent, and steeped in the scent of lemon oil and ancient respectability. We were no longer in the underworld. We were in the gilded cage of Charleston society. We moved quickly through the formal dining room, past generations of portraits, and into Arthur's immense private study, the heart of his public persona. The pride of the Cole family, Nathan said, sweeping his flashlight beam across the room. Every book is leather-bound, every vase is imported. Where would a man hide something that would destroy everything he's built? I scanned the room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a heavy mahogany desk, and a massive mounted antique clock dominating the mantelpiece. Not in the safe, I said, pointing to the obvious wall safe hidden behind a landscape painting. Too easy. He'd hide it somewhere that tells a story. A story about his family. I walked toward the long wall of books. Most were dry legal texts. Then I spotted it. A section dedicated entirely to genealogy and Charleston history. Arthur's obsession. The serpent's brother's pride, I whispered. He prides himself on his lineage. He'd never hide the truth of his betrayal within the history of his family. I pulled out a thick volume, The Notable Families of Charleston 1750 to 1900. I flipped through the pages, noting the elaborate Cole family tree. Nathan, meanwhile, had moved to the wall opposite, studying the mantelpiece where dozens of silver-framed photographs stood guard. He paused at one, a formal stoic portrait of his parents, Elizabeth and his father, Admiral Cole. "This house was built on a lie, Sarah," Nathan said, his voice laced with venom. "My father died a hero, honored by the city. But Elias's evidence implied my father was a thief. Arthur never let anyone touch this photo. It's the symbol of the perfection he's always chased." "Perfection is boring," I countered, running my hand along the bookshelf. "But family history can be compromised. Look at the lineage." I found the entry for Arthur Cole, born in 1902. Next to it, someone had written a single, almost invisible word in pencil. Bastard. My father. The realization was sickening. He had known and he had used it. I ran my hand across the shelving in that section. It was the only part of the bookshelf that seemed subtly off-kilter, slightly deeper than the rest. "This wall is hollow," I announced, feeling the subtle give beneath the wood. "It's a false back." Nathan moved instantly, his gun now out but pointed down. He tried the obvious pulls and levers but nothing moved. "A mechanism," I deduced, remembering my father's penchant for elegant, complex locks. "It needs a key or a sequence." I looked back at the family tree, at my father's handwritten damning insult. Arthur's pride was built on the perfect image of the Cole family. The flaw, the bastard stain, was his only known weakness. "The birth dates," I said, moving quickly to the genealogical record. Arthur's date, his father's, and the key date. His mother Elizabeth's wedding day to Admiral Cole. That's the sequence. It's the timeline of the lie. We worked together, calculating the 6-digit sequence from the dates, and the subtle difference in the number of children listed in the original printing versus Arthur's updated entries. "Now where's the dial?" I scanned the immediate area. My gaze landed on the antique clock on the mantelpiece. "The clock," I said. "Arthur's whole life is ruled by time and reputation." Nathan used the small knob on the clock's face to input the 6-digit code. Click. The entire section of the bookshelf slid inward with a slow, grinding sound, revealing a small, temperature-controlled recess. And inside, resting on a pedestal, was the object of our desperate search. A single leather-bound volume, jet black, secured with a thin brass chain and a padlock. The Black Ledger. Relief washed over me, so potent it was nearly debilitating. We had done it. We found it, I breathed, reaching for the book. But before my fingers could graze the worn leather, a sharp, cold voice cut through the silence of the room. Don't touch that, Miss Davenport. It's a delicate piece of evidence. We froze. Standing in the doorway of the study, impeccably dressed and holding a silver-plated pistol that matched the one used to kill my father, was Captain Elias Thorne. He wasn't compromised. He wasn't blind. He was the assassin. Thorne, Nathan growled, spinning around, his service revolver raised, trained directly on the captain's chest. You've been tracking us. Thorne smiled, a slow, ugly expression that ruined his handsome face. Of course, Detective. I've been tracking all the key players. I orchestrated the senator's death. I cleaned up the runner at the coil, and I allowed you to take the bait on the Elizabeth Cole photograph. My mind raced. Arthur was the financier, the serpent's brother. Thorne was the lethal operative arm, the man who literally pulled the trigger. Arthur is your boss? I asked, my voice steady despite the hammer blow of the shock. We're partners, Thorne corrected, taking a calculated step into the room. Arthur had the money and the network. I had the protection and the police force. We financed the whole city, Miss Davenport. But the moment your father started leaving these little clues for his clever daughter, he became a liability. Thorne wasn't aiming at Nathan. He was aiming at me. Drop the gun, Nathan, Thorne commanded, his focus absolute. Or the senator's daughter here dies before she ever gets her hands on that ledger. You won't shoot, I challenged, knowing the bluff was my only chance. You're in Arthur's house. A second body here, a high-ranking police officer, ruins everything. A pity. I was hoping you'd say that. Thorne's smile widened, an expression of pure, unadulterated evil. Because I'm not here to kill you, Sarah. I'm here to kill him. With impossible speed, Thorne didn't shoot me. He fired a single deafening shot, not at Nathan's chest, but at the massive mounted photograph of Admiral and Elizabeth Cole. The glass shattered, sending splinters across the room. Nathan flinched, his focus broken by the destruction of his family's image. In that split second, Thorne vaulted forward, his hand snapping out, knocking Nathan's revolver across the room. The two men collided in a brutal flurry of punches and grunts, trained killers fighting for survival. I knew Nathan was faster, stronger, but Thorne was desperate and fueled by a fanatic's conviction. I scrambled past the fighting men, lunging for the black ledger, the key to the entire city's corruption. My fingers wrapped around the worn leather. Sarah, run! Nathan shouted, his voice strained as Thorne's fingers found his throat. I pulled the ledger free, tearing the thin brass chain. But as the book came free, I saw that the chain hadn't been secured by a simple lock. It was a tripwire. The moment the chain snapped, a small silver capsule the size of a cigarette dropped from the lock mechanism and bounced on the wood floor near the pedestal. Thorne saw it too. His eyes wide with panic met mine. Cyanide! Thorne screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. Arthur rigged it. It's a failsafe. We're all dead. I stared at the capsule, knowing the deadly, invisible gas would fill the room in seconds. The ledger, the evidence, the truth, it was all a booby trap. Nathan, seeing his chance, delivered a savage blow to Thorne's temple. Thorne crumpled, unconscious. Nathan dove for me, his powerful body shielding mine. The back door. Now! Nathan roared, his eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen before. We scrambled out of the study and into the hall. But as Nathan slammed the heavy mahogany door shut, the sound was immediately followed by a new, deafening noise. Sirens. They were closing in from both ends of the street. Not the casual patrol of local police, but a wall of sound that meant a coordinated, high-level operation. Arthur had called in the cavalry, a fully compromised police force, to seal the house. We were trapped inside Arthur Cole's pride, with a poison study behind us and a wall of corrupt authority closing in from the front. And the black ledger, the ultimate weapon, was heavy and cold in my grasp. Chapter 5. The sound of the sirens was a physical wave, crashing against the sturdy stone of the Cole mansion. They weren't just searching. They were surrounding the entire block. We were in a trap, sprung by a man who valued his secrets more than the lives of his brother and his accomplice. The back door is exposed. They'll have it covered first, Nathan rasped, dragging Thorne's unconscious body further into the shadow of the hallway. The scent of cyanide, faint but acrid, was already beginning to seep out from beneath the study door. I clutched the black ledger, its worn leather cover cold against my damp palm. We can't go out the front. They'll have the entrance sealed. We need height. We need to see the escape routes. Nathan's eyes, still reeling from the shock of his mother's betrayal and the near-fatal cyanide trap, darted to the ceiling. The Widow's Walk. Arthur's father, the Admiral, built it. It overlooks the harbor. We ran, not up the grand central staircase, which was too visible, but up the narrow servant steps tucked behind the kitchen. The stairs were steep and dark, forcing us into agonizing proximity. The unspoken history between us, the love, the lies, the 2-decades-old affair. A suffocating blanket. Why the cyanide? I forced the question out, needing to cut through the emotion with logic. If Thorne was his partner, why try to kill him too? Arthur doesn't trust anyone, Nathan said, taking the steps 2 at a time. The ledger is the ultimate proof. Thorne knew too much. He was a second-generation liability, just like my mother was a first-generation heartbreak. Arthur planned to clean house completely. We emerged onto the top-floor landing. The air was colder here, dustier, smelling of old cedar and decay. A final narrow door led to the roof. We burst onto the Widow's Walk. A small railed perch perched high above the battery. The rain had softened to a mist, and the entire city was laid out before us. The dark expanse of the Atlantic, the snaking line of the docks, and the glittering, deceptive lights of Charleston's grand estates. Below us, the world was alive with corruption. Patrol cars with blinking blue lights converged on the house. Men in crisp, dark uniforms, Nathan's colleagues, were setting up a perimeter. I recognized Captain Thorne's personal sedan among the cars, confirming that this was a high-level police operation directed by Arthur, not a simple arrest. The police are here to secure the ledger, not to save us, I observed, scanning the rooftops. We can't jump. The drop is too far, and the garden is covered. Nathan was already focused on the next building. A neighboring mansion with a sharply pitched slate roof. It was about 10 feet away. There's an old storm drain pipe connecting the eaves, Nathan said, his voice quiet and strained as he gauged the distance. It'll be slick with rain, but it's our only path. We cross the rooftops, drop into the alley behind the block, and disappear into the working waterfront. A tightrope walk in the middle of a police siege. Charming, I muttered, but I was already stripping off my silk dress, knowing it would be a dangerous hindrance. Beneath it, I still wore the practical suit trousers and waistcoat. You go first. Get a secure footing. No. You go first, Nathan insisted, pushing me gently toward the edge. If I go first, they'll see me. If you go, I provide a distraction. If anyone tries to follow, I pin them down. If you fall, I catch you. His words, if you fall, I catch you, were a promise and a confession. It was the moment where duty officially dissolved into something personal, dangerous, and utterly thrilling. I gripped the ledger, took a deep breath of the salt-laced air, and moved to the edge. The gap was wider than it looked. The storm drain pipe was rusted and thin. I had to trust his eyes, trust his word, and trust my own desperate agility. I launched myself across the chasm, hitting the slick pipe hard. The metal groaned in protest, but it held. I scrambled across the final few feet of the roof, my fingers tearing on the sharp slate, until I finally reached the relative safety of the neighboring chimney stack. As I looked back, Nathan was already moving. He wasn't following me. He was making himself visible. He moved to the edge of the Widow's Walk, drawing his revolver and firing 2 shots into the air. A deliberate, unmistakable signal that he was armed and dangerous. Police! I have the ledger. Back OFF or I blow this city wide open, he roared, his voice carrying clearly over the wailing sirens. Below, the uniformed officers panicked. They saw the disgraced detective holding the key to their entire corrupted operation. They broke formation, scattering for cover. In that critical moment of distraction, Nathan dove. He cleared the gap in a powerful, desperate arc, landing heavily on the slate roof beside me. That was quite the declaration, I whispered, pulling him down behind the chimney. They'll spend the next 10 minutes arguing over whether to bring in the riot squad or an armored vehicle, Nathan said, breathing hard, his face flushed with adrenaline. That's our window. We navigated the treacherous rooftops for 3 blocks, moving parallel to the harbor until we reached a narrow, rickety fire escape leading down into a maze of hidden alleyways between 2 warehouses. The alley smelled of brine and wet garbage, the true scent of the city's underbelly. We dropped onto the cobblestones just as the first police searchlights hit the rooftop we just vacated. We ran hunched over, blending into the shadows. We needed a secure hideout, a place to decipher the full contents of the Black Ledger, and a means to leak the contents to the world before Arthur could fabricate his escape narrative. We can't go to your flat. It's the first place Arthur will torch, Nathan said, grabbing my arm and pulling me into the darkest recess beneath a crumbling wooden staircase. I have one last bolt hole, I said, catching my breath. My father's first office. It's not in the ledger, and it's not in the official records. It's a defunct print shop near the docks, tucked away behind the Siren's Call, a disreputable jazz club. The Siren's Call, Nathan repeated, a dark look crossing his face. Another place where the city's finest go to forget they have wives. Good. No one will look for a senator's daughter in a dive like that. The Siren's Call was a sensory overload compared to the opulent Coil. It was rougher, louder, and reeked of cheap bourbon and sweat. But it served its purpose. It was the perfect distraction. We slipped past the front, ignoring the cacophony of the trumpets, and into the silent darkness of the defunct print shop next door. My father had used the shop as a cover during his early days in politics. It was filled with dusty printing presses, stacks of yellowed paper, and an old pot-bellied stove. It was crude, but it was safe. We locked the heavy steel door and placed the Black Ledger on a dusty work table beneath a bare, low-hanging bulb. This is it, Nathan, I said, running my hand over the embossed title. The final act. The answer to every question. He nodded, but he didn't reach for the book. He reached for me. His fingers gently traced the line of grime and sweat on my cheek, his eyes holding mine with an agonizing mixture of exhaustion, fear, and something electric and irresistible. The shared danger had torn down the walls he had spent 5 years building. I let him go, he confessed, his voice a rough whisper. Back in your father's office. The killer. I could have taken the shot, but I hesitated, because I knew if I killed him I would have to kill Arthur next. I let him run, hoping he'd lead me to Arthur. I put my brother over justice. You put your soul over your duty, I corrected, reaching up to cover his hand with mine. You let him go because you aren't a killer, Nathan. You're a cop with a conscience. And that's why we have to use this ledger now, before Arthur uses that photo of us at the yacht club to hang you out to dry. The moment was too tense, too charged with imminent death and shared betrayal to be anything but honest. The need was overwhelming. He leaned in and I met him halfway. The kiss was not soft or slow. It was a desperate, burning declaration against the cold reality of our imminent doom. The final shattering of the pretense we had maintained for years. When we finally broke apart, our breath ragged. The air in the small room was thin with desire and danger. Now the ledger, I said, my voice trembling only slightly. We opened the book. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a meticulously kept record of every illegal transaction. The bonds, the rum, the bribes, and the specific codes used to finance the political careers of every powerful man in the state. The final entry, scrawled on the last page in Arthur Cole's neat hand, wasn't a transaction. It was an instruction. Final shipment. Tonight. The old Citadel Library. Midnight. The ledger serves as the final clearance key. Deliver to the broker. Then destroy all assets. The Citadel Library, I said, my mind racing. It's the oldest building on campus. It's closed to the public and currently under renovation. Perfect for a secret rendezvous. Arthur isn't going to be there, Nathan realized, his eyes narrowing. He set the cyanide trap to kill Thorne. He's sending the broker to collect the ledger, then kill whoever shows up. It's a perfect frame-up. If we hand over the ledger to the broker, the entire investigation ends, I said. But if we become the broker, we catch Arthur's final accomplice, and we expose the operation. I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:30 p.m. 30 minutes until midnight. Arthur said the ledger serves as the clearance key, I concluded. He'll have a spotter to confirm the person holding the book is legitimate. We go to the library. We meet the broker. We use this ledger as a weapon, not a surrender. I reached for my coat, the cold dread replaced by a professional journalist's determination. Let's go, I said. As we reached the door, Nathan stopped me, his face grim. He pointed to the final name listed on the ledger's main index page, a name we had both missed in our frantic search. It was the highest payer, the ultimate beneficiary, the unseen hand guiding Arthur. The name, written in my father's signature green ink, was Captain Elias Thorne. Thorne wasn't Arthur's partner, Sarah? Nathan whispered, the implication a terrifying new layer of deceit. He was the broker. Arthur was running him. Thorne was supposed to get the ledger and destroy us all. My blood ran cold. Thorne was not only the killer, but the ultimate prize in this corruption ring. And we had left him unconscious but very much alive in Arthur's house. If Thorne is the broker and Arthur killed my father to get rid of him, I reasoned, then who is Arthur waiting for at the library? Just then a sudden blinding light pierced the dusty windows of the print shop. We heard the sharp squeal of tires skidding to a halt outside. It's not the police, Nathan said, recognizing the sound of a specific, high-powered engine. It's a private car. And I know exactly whose it is. He gently pushed me behind a massive printing press, drawing his revolver and cocking the hammer. The steel door shuddered under a tremendous impact. The lock burst inward with a sickening metallic shriek, and the heavy door flew open. Standing silhouetted against the streetlights, his suit immaculate despite the lateness of the hour, was Arthur Cole. He was not alone. He was flanked by two massive men in dark suits, both holding sawed-off shotguns. Arthur stepped into the light, his expression a chilling mixture of fury and sorrow as he looked at his brother. He held a small antique pistol. Nathan, Arthur said, his voice laced with the cold authority of a man who owned the night. You shouldn't have gone back for her. And Sarah, you should have stayed in New York. You've ruined my life. Now give me my ledger, or I'll save the city the expense of your trial. Chapter 6. The silence that followed Arthur's command was broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the rhythmic pounding jazz from the club next door. Nathan and I were cornered behind the heavy, dust-caked printing press, the ledger clutched tight to my chest. Arthur Cole, the polished attorney, stood framed in the broken doorway, backed by the twin barrels of two shotguns. You're too late, Arthur, Nathan said, his voice flat and steady. Thorne is unconscious in your study. He told us everything. We have the black ledger. It's over. Arthur didn't flinch. He let out a low, almost mournful laugh. Thorne? Elias is a foot soldier, Nathan. A useful, violent idiot who thought he was running the show. He was simply the cleaner. And he didn't tell you anything. He was a dead man walking the moment he killed the senator. He leveled the antique pistol, the one that had belonged to our grandfathers, directly at Nathan. I didn't come here for Elias. I came for you, Nathan. And for the evidence that proves your father, the great Admiral Cole, was the architect of this entire operation. The revelation was a punch to the gut, a final horrifying twist that fractured every truth we thought we knew. My father, Nathan whispered, the shock rendering him motionless. He used Elias Davenport for 30 years, brother, Arthur said, the bitterness sharp in his voice. He was the true serpent. He built the ring, financed the city's elite, and used his reputation as a war hero as a shield. When he died, it all fell to me. The ledger is a record of his sins, Nathan, not mine. Lies, I spat, stepping out from behind the press, using my height and my sheer nerve to draw his focus away from Nathan. My father's notes implicated you. Your father, Arthur said, his eyes darkening, was trying to use his own guilt in your foolish investigation to save his tarnished legacy. He was trying to pin his boss's crimes, our father's crimes, on me. He blackmailed me with that photo of our mother and him, knowing the scandal would destroy me, but he never actually intended to reveal the ledger. I realized the horrifying truth. My father's clues, his suicide, the vault trap, the photo. It was all a brilliant Machiavellian chess game designed not to expose the ring, but to force Arthur to destroy the ledger, thereby protecting the Admiral's reputation, my father's friends, and indirectly, his own memory. Arthur had simply refused to play the victim. He used Thorne's jealousy and violence to eliminate the senator and seize the ledger's power for himself. You killed Senator Davenport? Nathan demanded, his voice strained with fury. I had Thorne pull the trigger, Arthur corrected, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. But he was going to expose the Admiral's ring and destroy our name. I had no choice, Nathan. This city needs the money, and the Admiral's reputation needs protecting. Arthur took a step closer. Now I will give you a final chance. Give me the black ledger. We burn it, we frame Thorne for everything, the senator's murder, the smuggling, the whole operation. And you, Nathan, walk away clean. Your badge, your reputation, your future. All intact. It was the ultimate temptation. Bury the truth to save the man he loved, his brother, and the man he revered, his father. Nathan's eyes locked on mine. He didn't need to speak. The moment of truth, the terrible intersection of love and justice, was upon us. I made the choice for him. You don't understand the ledger's power, Arthur, I said, holding the book high. It's not just a list of transactions. It's a key. The final clearance key. The last entry says the ledger must be delivered to the broker at the Citadel Library at midnight. You think Thorne is the broker, but he was only the collector. The Admiral was smarter than that. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:50 p.m. The broker is waiting for you, I stated, a thrilling, terrifying certainty blooming in my chest. The true head of the organization. The one your father answered to. And if you don't show Arthur, that person will know the ledger is compromised. They'll shut down the operation and eliminate every loose end, including you. Arthur's composure finally broke. His eyes widened, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. There is no one above the Admiral. That's a lie. Is it? I challenged, tossing the heavy ledger onto the work table. It landed with a dull thud. You've been protecting your father's legacy, Arthur. But what if your father was also protecting his master? If you don't go to the library now, you sacrifice the entire network, and you expose yourself as the man who let the money dry up. The dilemma was perfect. Arthur had to choose between immediate danger, confronting his brother and the shotguns, and the terrifying unknown threat of failing his father's final mission. His pride, his obedience to the Admiral's command, was his undoing. Arthur stared at the ledger, then at Nathan, then back at me. He was a creature of order, and the ledger represented the only path back to control. We leave now, he commanded his thugs, his voice thick with strained authority. Nathan, stay with her. If you move, if you call the police, I swear I will let Thorne take the fall, and I will destroy every last piece of evidence you hold dear, including your father's memory. I'll be back for you both. Arthur and his men turned and rushed out the shattered doorway, running toward his waiting car and the rendezvous with the broker. As soon as their engine roared away, Nathan moved. He didn't look at the ledger, he didn't look at me. He snatched a heavy steel bar from the printing press and smashed the pot-bellied stove, sending a shower of burning coal onto the floor. What are you doing? I gasped, grabbing the black ledger. Arthur said he'd destroy his father's memory, Nathan stated, his eyes cold and distant. But he can't. Not if it's already in the public domain. We are going to leak the Admiral's involvement, not just Arthur's. We collapse the entire structure. He grabbed a heavy stack of yellowed paper from the press, pulled the ledger open to the most damning pages, the full list of corrupt officials, and using the thick ancient typeface of the defunct print shop, he began to manually run the pages through the press. "We don't have time to print a full indictment," he said, working the machine with desperate speed. "But we have time for a single earth-shattering broadside. The headline that ends Charleston's reign of corruption." Within 5 agonizing minutes, the first copies were sliding off the press. Huge, crude, single-sheet posters detailing the Admiral's guilt, Arthur's role as the Serpent's brother, and the full list of officials who had taken the bribe money. "You take these," Nathan said, thrusting the stack into my arms. "Go. Go to the Post, the Tribune, the Telegraph office. Flood the city. Get on the wires to New York. If you run the story, even Arthur and the broker can't bury it. I'll go to the library. I'll confront Arthur and the broker, and I'll get the confession." "No," I pleaded, grabbing his face with my smoke-stained hands. "The broker is the final killer. Arthur is desperate. It's too dangerous. We go together." "My father's name is on this ledger, Sarah," he said, his eyes filled with a searing, terrible finality. "This is my ending to his story. I have to see it through. Get the truth out. That is justice." He sealed our deal with a brief, brutal kiss, a final declaration of our tangled, tragic love, and then he was gone, a dark shadow swallowed by the alley, running toward the Citadel Library and the rendezvous with the unknown. I stood alone in the smoke-filled press shop, the freshly printed broadsides heavy in my arms. I had the truth, the vengeance for my father, and the key to saving the city. But the price was the man I loved, running toward a reckoning that might cost him his life. I stared down at the crude, damning headline. "Admiral Cole, the city's true serpent." I grabbed the ledger, tucked the broadsides under my waistcoat, and slipped out into the misty Charleston night. I was a journalist with the biggest story in the country, but my heart was split in two. I had to run the truth, but I couldn't abandon the man who was sacrificing everything for it. I ran not toward the newspaper office, but toward the nearest alley where I knew I could commandeer a taxi, racing toward the old Citadel Library. I was going to beat Nathan to the broker, and I was going to find out who was more dangerous, the man who had ordered my father's death, or the man who had just stolen my heart. The choice between love and justice was agonizingly simple now. I would have both. Epilogue. I burst into the vast, echoing silence of the old Citadel Library moments after midnight, the printed broadsides tucked into a satchel. The air inside smelled of plaster dust and ancient paper. I could hear the faint, urgent whispers of men, Nathan, Arthur, and a third unknown presence, coming from the restricted archives on the second floor. I scaled the grand staircase, arriving just as the confrontation reached its bloody climax. Arthur stood defiant, his antique pistol trained on a towering figure shrouded in the gloom. Nathan was using the high stacks of books for cover, his own revolver raised. "The ledger is compromised, General," Arthur hissed. "We have minutes before the press breaks the Admiral's guilt." The figure stepped forward, and I saw the face of General Hayes, the most respected man in South Carolina, a political untouchable, a war hero, and the one person who could command the Admiral. He was the broker. "You failed, Arthur," the general's voice boomed, calm and lethal. "The ledger was my insurance. Now it's a liability." The general didn't move. He simply nodded toward a fourth man, a familiar, hulking figure who stepped out of the shadows. Captain Elias Thorne. He wasn't unconscious in the study. He was an accomplice, feigning injury to follow Arthur. Thorne raised his pistol, aimed at Arthur. "General's orders, sir. Clean up all loose ends. BLAM." The shot rang out. But it wasn't Thorne's. Nathan fired from the darkness, hitting Thorne's arm. Thorne dropped his weapon with a howl of pain. Chaos erupted. Arthur, stunned by Thorne's betrayal, hesitated. The general, seeing his plot unravel, lunged for the ledger I had dropped on the floor near the entrance. "The truth is out, General," I screamed, tearing the first broadside from my satchel and throwing it into the light. "The city knows about Admiral Cole's corruption." The distraction worked. The general recoiled, his face contorted in shock and rage. Nathan seized the moment. He tackled Thorne, slamming him against a shelf. Arthur, seeing his mentor exposed and his life in peril, made his final desperate choice. He didn't shoot Nathan. He shot General Hayes. The general fell with a gasping cry, the ledger skidding across the polished marble. "I won't let you destroy my father's memory," Arthur cried, then turning to Nathan, his eyes filled with a tortured plea, he added, "It was my father's ring, Nathan. Not mine." He turned the antique pistol on himself. "Arthur, no." Nathan lunged, but it was too late. The final shot of the night cracked through the silence. Aftermath. Captain Thorne was arrested, along with the unconscious General Hayes. The next morning, the crude, printed broadsides were plastered across every public surface in Charleston, followed by the complete, detailed exposé run by my journalist contacts in New York. The city's elite reeled. The mayor resigned. The police commissioner was indicted. The serpent's coil was raided. The admiral's legacy was shattered. Justice was served, but the cost was devastating. Arthur Cole was dead by his own hand, a final victim of a father's decades-long corruption. Nathan Cole, a man who had faced the true horror of war, now had to face the quiet, enduring pain of his family's wreckage. He resigned from the police force, refusing to be part of a system he no longer trusted. We stood together on the docks as the sun rose, the salt wind whipping the air. We were alive but profoundly changed, bound by the secrets and the bloodshed of our terrible heritage. "I have the evidence, Sarah," Nathan said, tucking a small silver locket, his mother's, into my hand. "And you have the voice. What now?" "Now," I said, looking out over the harbor, the morning light painting the world in a deceptive gold. "We tell the whole story. The lies, the love, the betrayal. The world needs to know the whispers behind the roses." The story continues. If you were captivated by the shadows and secrets of 1930s Charleston, and the explosive chemistry between Sarah and Nathan, you've only scratched the surface of the mysteries we uncover. The whispers beneath the roses are only the beginning. For a deeper dive into the real-life historical secrets that inspired this plot, from the coded messages of the Prohibition era to the devastating betrayals that built Charleston's high society, subscribe and hit the notification bell on my channel, Mysteries and Roses. We break down the most compelling historical crimes and romantic suspense plots, exploring the truth behind the fiction.